January, the year 1002. The Italian castle of Paterno. In a stiflingly hot bedroom, a man is burning alive from a severe malarial fever. He is only 21 years old. On the stone floor lies a heavy golden gobletta, symbol of power that, right at this very moment, is losing all its meaning. Otto III, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, is dying. A ruler who dreamed of building a universal, peaceful Christian Europe stretching from Rome to the Slavic forests. With his final breath, that illusion shatters into a million pieces. The news of the emperor's death crawls across the Alps, and, a few weeks later, reaches Gniezno, the capital of the Polish Principality. The ruler of the Poles, Boleslav, silently listens to the messenger. He is 35. Just 2 years ago, this young emperor had placed a diadem on his head and called him brother. Boleslav does not waste time mourning. He is a pragmatist. He knows what all of Europe will soon have to learn through its own spilled blood. The 11th century does not believe in brotherhood. Politics in this world is not about treaties sealed with wax. Politics is heavy cavalry standing at your border and garrisons controlling your trade routes. The death of Otto means one thing. The throne in Germany will be taken by a man who will try to return the Slavs to the status of slaves and tribute payers. Diplomacy is dead. To preserve sovereignty, you have to strike first. A state is not some divine gift. It is a heavy, ravenous mechanism. And if you are squeezed between the Holy Roman Empire to the west and the ambitious Kievan Rus to the east, you do not have the right to show weakness. The right to independence here is not gifted. It must be torn away with cold iron. And Boleslav the Brave makes a decision that will forever change the balance of power in Eastern Europe. If you think about it, we are looking at a historical anomaly. In the next hour and a half, we are going to dissect the anatomy of one of the most audacious geopolitical campaigns of the Middle Ages. We will trace how a peripheral principality, which just 50 years prior was considered a nameless forest tribe, managed to impose its will on the two main superpowers of the continent. You will find out how the Polish economy withstood 15 years of continuous, exhausting warfare against the German army. Why Boleslav created a transnational mercenary corporation, uniting heavy Germanic knights with steppe-dwelling Pechenegs. What really happened on a sweltering July day on the Bug River, where a single thrown insult triggered the utter annihilation of Yaroslav the Wise's army, and how a Western ruler entered the mother of all Russian cities, Kyiv, turning war into a hyper-profitable business project. But most importantly, we will try to answer the ultimate question. What price does a nation pay for greatness? Because the triumph of the predator often becomes a trap for his heirs. Boleslav the Brave will win everything, and he will leave nothing but scorched earth in his wake. The death of Otto III left a vacuum in its wake, and the German elite filled it with a man who was the exact opposite of the late emperor. Henry II, Duke of Bavaria, ascended to the throne. While Otto dreamed of a universal Christian empire where all nations were equal in Christ, Henry preferred to balance the books. He was no dreamer. He was a dry, pedantic pragmatist. To him, the eastern borders of the empire were not a place for missionary feats, they were a taxation zone. Henry didn't harbor any irrational hatred toward Boleslav. What he had was imperial logic. In his worldview, a Polish duke parading around in a diadem and calling himself the emperor's brother was a dangerous political anomaly, a barbarian who thought far too highly of himself. This anomaly needed to be eliminated. The Poles had to be returned to the status of obedient tribute payers, just as they had been under Henry's grandfather. Boleslav understood this, but he was still trying to play by the old rules. He believed that the status he received in Gniezno 2 years prior held real political weight. In July 1002, Boleslav arrives in Merseburg. There, Henry is gathering the German nobility to consolidate his power. The Polish duke behaves not like a vassal, but like a powerful ally. He brings a wealthy diplomatic delegation, offers his military support, and even publicly recognizes Henry's right to the crown. He wants just one thing: for the new king to confirm all the privileges granted to the Poles by Otto. Henry accepts the gifts. He says the right words, but the atmosphere surrounding the Polish delegation grows increasingly suffocating. In the corridors, the German margraves avert their eyes. Armed men gather in the castle courtyard, men who wear no crests and answer to no official commander. And here, an event occurs that will forever alter the politics of the Piast dynasty. When the meeting concludes and Boleslav, along with his retinue, heads for the palace exit, the mob of armed men lunges at the Polish duke. This isn't a spontaneous riot. It's a highly organized ambush right inside the king's residence. Swords flash in the sun, arrows fly. Boleslav survives only by a miracle. Several German aristocrats who still remembered the code of knightly honor, including Bernard, Duke of Saxony, literally shield him with their own bodies and bucklers, helping him fight his way to the horses. The Poles break out of Merseburg, leaving their dead bodyguards behind on the cobblestones. Historians still debate to this day whether Henry gave a direct order to assassinate Boleslav, or if he merely looked the other way regarding his men's actions. For Boleslav, that debate was utterly irrelevant. Driving his horse eastward, he understood the main takeaway. The King of Germany had created an environment in which murdering the Polish ruler was considered an excellent career move. At that exact moment, on the dusty road leading out of Merseburg, the diplomatic era of the Piasts comes to an end. Boleslav realizes, if you come in peace and get stabbed in the back, it means treaties aren't even worth the parchment they are written on. Europe respects only one argument, the kind that leaves deep, slashing wounds. Most rulers in Boleslav's shoes would have returned home, locked themselves in their capital, and started sending letters of complaint to the Pope about German treachery. Boleslav operates differently. He strikes first. Without even waiting to return to Gniezno, right on the march, he orders his troops to go on the offensive. He doesn't attack in a fit of blind rage. This is a cold, calculated military operation. The Polish army lightning strikes and captures the border German territories, the lands of the Lusatians and Milcini, known as Lusatia and Milsko, as well as the strategically vital Meissen. There is no nationalistic grievance in this decision. It's pure geopolitics. Boleslav knows that war with the empire is now inevitable, and if war is inevitable, it must be fought on foreign soil. Lusatia and Milsko become the buffer zone. The Polish Duke pushes the border to the west, ensuring that the German armies will burn foreign villages long before they ever reach Polish ones. Henry II is furious. Some petty Eastern Duke didn't just survive an assassination attempt, he took a bite out of the Holy Roman Empire and seized the strategic initiative. Boleslav won the first round. He proved he could hit fast and hit hard. He restructured the state. Diplomats gave way to warlords. Tax revenues poured into the forges, and the country was transformed into a single, massive military camp. But his triumph ended there, because waiting ahead was an adversary the Piasts did not yet know how to fight. Starting a war with an empire is easy if you are audacious enough. But how do you feed an army that is supposed to hold off that empire for the next 15 years? In Merseburg, Boleslav realized diplomacy was dead. By seizing the borderlands, he made the first move. But it is one thing to launch a surprise attack on a neighbor's fortresses. It is an entirely different beast to withstand the counterpunch of an empire whose resources exceed yours dozens of times over. The inertia of war had been set into motion. 11th century warfare is not about knightly tournaments or beautiful cavalry charges under fluttering banners. It is logistics, it is mud, and it is relentless, exhausting labor. Henry II gathers an invasion army. Backing him is the wealth of the German bishoprics, heavy Bavarian cavalry, and Bohemian allies hungry for revenge. Backing Boleslav are forests, swamps, and an army that needs to be fed every single day. To understand how Poland managed to hold out for 15 years against the greatest military machine in Europe, you have to look at the men who carried this war on their shoulders. Autumn 1015, a border encampment, snow mixed with freezing rain. A man sits by the fire, meticulously rubbing animal fat into his chainmail so the iron won't be devoured by rust. The air smells of wet wool, horse sweat, and tar. This is a pancerny, the elite of the Piast army, a heavily armored cavalryman. His equipment costs a fortune. A long Carolingian sword, often forged in those very same German lands. A spear, a wooden shield covered in leather, a helmet, and most importantly, a war horse that demands premium oats, not just whatever grass it can graze. Equipping just one of these fighters is equivalent to the cost of a herd of 40 cows. Boleslav has about 4,000 of these horsemen, plus thousands of foot archers and spearmen. This army isn't called up by a levy for a couple of months. This is a regular professional military corporation. They live for war. And this corporation is fully sustained by the state. If you think deeply about these numbers, it becomes crystal clear. Boleslav turned his country into a resource extraction mechanism. Every village from Poznan to Krakow is burdened with a brutal tax. Peasants hand over grain, pigs, honey, and draft animals, just so the Duke's retainers can maintain their combat readiness. The state is living on the absolute edge, wringing out its last drop of lifeblood to ensure an iron shield always stands at the border. Henry II invades Poland 3 times. In 1005, 1010, and 1015, and every single time Boleslav deploys the same cold strategy. He denies the emperor a pitched battle. Leading his regiments out into an open field against a numerically superior imperial army would mean losing the entire country in a single morning. Instead, Boleslav activates a scorched earth tactic. The Germans cross the Oder River and find nothing but empty voids. The crops are burned, the livestock is driven away, the wells are poisoned, the local population is hidden deep in impenetrable thickets and behind the high earthen ramparts of fortified towns. Polish detachments operate like ghosts. They fell trees across forest roads, blocking the advance of heavy supply wagons. They attack straggling units at night, slaughter foragers, and instantly dissolve back into the woods. The imperial army, a giant lumbering machine, begins to starve. Dysentery breaks out in the camps. Horses drop dead from lack of fodder. The climax of this strategy is the defense of the Niemcha fortress in 1017. The emperor besieges the city. The Germans build siege towers and stone-throwing engines. The German chronicler Thietmar of Merseburg records an astonishing detail with grudging respect. The defenders of Niemcha do not panic under bombardment. They silently and methodically patch the breached walls, while simultaneously trying to smash the enemy's siege engines with grappling hooks and boulders. No cries for mercy, just the mechanical, heavy labor of survival. After a month of standing in the mud, having lost hundreds of men to disease and arrows, the proud Emperor Henry orders the siege lifted. He leaves with nothing. Boleslav outplayed the empire. He proved that his lands could not be held by force. The war in the west had turned into a pointless quagmire for the Germans, and Henry breaks. In January 1018, at the castle of Budzishin, today the German city of Bautzen, peace treaty is signed. The emperor admits defeat. The Sacia officially remains Polish. To seal the peace, Boleslav takes a German aristocrat, Oda, as his wife. It is an absolute triumph. A principality that half a century ago was considered a pagan backwater withstood the Holy Roman Empire and forced it to sign a peace treaty on its own terms. But right at this very moment, Boleslav the Brave faces the most terrifying threat of his entire reign, a threat he created himself. The war is over, but the Duke is left with a giant army, armed to the teeth. These men have been fighting for 15 years. They don't know how to sow wheat. They are used to living on plunder and military pay, and the treasury is completely empty. Everything went into the defense against the Germans. The peasants can no longer pay taxes. The reserves are depleted. If you tell these thousands of professional killers right now, the war is over, go back to civilian life, they will simply hoist Boleslav onto their spears. A machine forged for war cannot be stopped with a command. If it isn't given an external enemy, it will devour its own state. Boleslav urgently needs a new target, preferably one where the resistance will be disorganized and the loot will be colossal. And at that exact moment, a man appears on the Polish border, a man exiled from the capital of the richest state in Eastern Europe. January 30th, 1018. The castle of Budzishent, today the German city of Bautzen. A brutal Saxon winter. Snow crunches under the boots of heavily armored knights. In the main hall of the castle, a hearth fire burns, but the atmosphere is ice cold. Here, a peace is being signed that draws a line under 15 years of slaughter. The empire has surrendered. Henry II agrees to the Polish terms. Lusatia and Milsko strategic border territories pass permanently under Bolesław's control. But paper treaties in the 11th century are not enough. Peace must be sealed with blood, or, more precisely, a dynastic marriage. And here, right in Budzishyn, the 50-year-old Boleslav takes Oda as his wife, the youngest daughter of the late Margrave Eckhard of Meissen. For the Polish duke, this is already his fourth marriage. There is zero romance here, only crystallized geopolitics. The German aristocracy watches in silence as one of the most noble brides in the empire is handed over to a man they had called a savage and a usurper for years. Oda becomes a living wax seal on the peace treaty. The German chronicler Thietmar of Merseburg, recording these events, can barely hide his disgust. To him, this union sounds like a national humiliation. But politics is not built on the emotions of chroniclers. Boleslav returns to Gniezno as an absolute victor, and then silence falls. Imagine this silence. For 15 years, the forges of Greater Poland operated around the clock. For 15 years, the retinue lived in the saddle, fed off loot, and slept with weapons in their hands. War was the only way the economy knew how to function, and suddenly, everything stops. The Piast military machine is composed of thousands of professional killers. They are sitting in garrisons. They drink thick beer, clean chainmail that no longer has anything to protect them from, and they are frankly bored out of their minds. Most importantly, they need money. If you don't pay a heavily armored retainer in silver and plunder, he will quickly find someone to rob. And in peaceful Poland, there is no one left to rob except their own peasants, who have already had the shirts stripped off their backs for the sake of defeating the Germans. Peace turned out to be far more dangerous to Boleslav than war. Halting this mechanism inevitably led to it exploding from the inside out. The state urgently needed a lightning rod, a new target that would unite the army and refill the empty treasury. And that target walked right up to him. In the winter of that same year, 1018, an exhausted rider with a small retinue appears at the gates of the Polish court. It is Sviatopolk, the exiled prince of Kyiv, and concurrently Boleslav's son-in-law. A few years prior, the Brave had married off his daughter to him, hoping to cement Polish influence in the east. The plan had collapsed. In 1015, Vladimir the Great, the baptizer of Rus, died. A classic, merciless slaughter, for the throne instantly erupted in Kiev. Sviatopolk seized power for a short time, spilling the blood of his brothers, Boris and Gleb. But he couldn't hold the throne. Another brother came from the north, Yaroslav. He brought with him the men of Novgorod and savage Varangian mercenaries, struck a devastating blow, smashed Sviatopolk, and threw him out of the country. And now, the exile stands before Boleslav. He is begging for an army. In return, he promises everything: loyalty, any privileges desired, and most importantly, the return of the Chervan cities. This was a wealthy border territory that Vladimir the Great had forcefully taken from the Poles years ago. Boleslav listens to his son-in-law, but he isn't thinking about family ties. He isn't even thinking about justice. He is thinking about Kyiv. In the 11th century, Kyiv is not just a capital. It is a shining metropolis on the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks, a crucial hub for global trade arteries. While Polish fortifications are still built mostly of wood and earth, Kyiv is already erecting stone churches, Byzantine silk, Arab silver dirhams, spices, slaves, and furs all settle there. There is more wealth sitting in the cellars of Kievan boyars than in the treasury of the Holy Roman Empire. For Boleslav, this city is the perfect answer to his internal crisis, a massive, fast, infinitely profitable military campaign. It will keep the army occupied. It will feed the mercenaries. It will completely recoup all costs. The decision is made. The giant Piast military machine, which had just screeched to a halt in the west, pivots 180 degrees. Boleslav does not intend to march on Rus using only his own forces. He starts thinking like the CEO of a transnational corporation. He sends messengers to all corners of Europe, offering a cut of the Kievan gold. And it works. Yesterday's enemies, heavy German knights, willingly hire themselves out to his army. Hungarians answer the call, and, in his most cynical move, Boleslav strikes a temporary alliance with the Pechenegs, savage steppe nomads who are tasked with striking Rus from the south. Assembling this colorful, predatory horde takes months. Boleslav is highly confident. He just brought the German emperor to his knees. Surely he can handle some Kievan prince. But he fails to account for one thing. What awaits him is not just a punitive expedition. In the east, a man with the exact same steel will and the exact same cold pragmatism is consolidating his power. Yaroslav, who will later be called the Wise, already knows the Poles are coming, and he will not surrender the mother of all Russian cities without a fight. 1015. Vladimir the Great, the baptizer of Rusties. The moment his heart stops, the giant empire stretching from Novgorod to the Black Sea begins to tear at the seams. Vladimir did not leave behind a stable state apparatus. He left behind a tangled knot of ambitious sons, planted as viceroys in various cities, and every single one of them perfectly understood the unwritten rule of the 11th century. If the throne is empty, you either take the capital or you are buried. Action had to be fast. And the first to strike is the eldest in the clan, Sviatopolk. He seizes power in Kyiv, but formal seniority isn't enough. So the throne doesn't wobble. You have to clear the board of competitors around whom the opposition could rally. Sviatopolk gives the order to eliminate his half-brothers, Boris and Gleb. Later, church tradition will canonize them as the first Russian saints and passion-bearers, and Sviatopolk will forever go down in history with the moniker the Accursed, Fratricide, Judas. But if you strip away the religious filter and look at these events through the eyes of an 11th century politician, Sviatopolk was not a maniac. He did exactly what the logic of survival demanded. Boleslav the Brave did the exact same thing in his youth, exiling his own brothers from the country to maintain a monopoly on power. In this brutal world, paranoia is a professional requirement for a monarch. But Sviatopolk miscalculated one thing. He eliminated those who were easy to reach, and he missed the most dangerous one of all. Up north, in Novgorod, sat another brother, Yaroslav. He walked with a limp, but his political instincts were flawless. Yaroslav didn't sit in his keep waiting for assassins from Kyiv to arrive. He opened the Novgorod treasury and hired professionals, Varangians, heavy Scandinavian infantry who couldn't care less about the dynastic sentiments of the Rurikids. They were paid in silver for cracked skulls. Yaroslav led the Varangians and the Novgorod militia south too. This was no knightly duel. It was a ruthless, pragmatic massacre. Yaroslav's forces clashed with Sviatopolk's retinue at Lubech. The Varangians simply swept the Khivans away. Sviatopolk, having lost his army and his capital, fled the country. And now, look at the situation through the eyes of Boleslav the Brave. The exiled Sviatopolk comes to him in Gniezno, a son-in-law who has lost everything. Boleslav looks eastward and sees an absolute mirror image. Yaroslav is Boleslav himself 20 years ago, a smart, calculating strategist who burns down his own family for the crown. You cannot negotiate with a man like that. You can only break him. And Sviatopolk is the perfect political tool. He holds a legitimate claim to the Kievan throne, but he doesn't have a single spear left to his name. He is desperate. He is willing to sign anything. Sviatopolk offers Boleslav a deal: Polish swords in exchange for vassal status. He promises to return the Chervan cities to Poland, the rich borderlands that Vladimir the Great once forcefully stripped from the Piasts. He promises to throw open the gates of Kyiv to his allies. He promises the Polish knights gold, Byzantine silks, and silver, the likes of which they have never seen in their wooden fortresses. Boleslav accepts the terms, but make no mistake, the Polish Duke isn't gathering a giant army to restore justice and return the throne to a wronged relative. Sviatopolk is not an ally to him. Sviatopolk is merely a legitimate key to the golden gates of Kyiv. And as soon as that key turns in the lock, Boleslav the Brave intends to take everything for himself. But to reach Kyiv, he must first march his diverse, transnational army across hundreds of kilometers of forests and swamps. Spring 1018. Greater Poland transforms into a massive recruitment center. 11th century diplomacy rarely relies on high ideals. It speaks the language of silver and spoils. Boleslav sends out messengers with a simple commercial proposition. There is a city in the east where there is enough gold for everyone, and Europe answers. Imagine Boleslav's military camp somewhere on the eastern borders. This is no noble host from a chivalric romance. This is a loud, foul-smelling, transnational mercenary corporation. The air hums with a blend of Slavic, Germanic, and Turkic dialects. The core of the army is the Polish regular units, between 2,000 and 5,000 men, heavily armed panzerni in chainmail, and simple infantrymen carrying large wooden shields. They are grim, disciplined, and utterly loyal to the Duke. They already know how to fight long and methodically. Right next to them, the Germans pitch their tents. 300 heavy Saxon knights. These aren't just highway mercenaries. This is an official contingent sent to Boleslav by Emperor Henry II under the terms of the Peace of Bautzen. The irony of fate. Just a few months ago, these steel-clad men were trying to burn down Polish fortresses. Now they have arrived to kill for the Polish Duke. Their war horses are massive, their armor the best on the continent. They look down on the Slavs, but they follow orders, because Boleslav does not forgive insubordination. A little further away sits the camp of the Hungarians. 500 light cavalrymen, indispensable for reconnaissance and swift flanking strikes. But the most exotic and terrifying asset of this army will join them a bit later, out in the steppes. 1,000 Pechenegs, savage nomads with whom Boleslav negotiated via his steppe envoys. They don't pitch tents. They sleep right on the ground, drink mare's milk, and are armed with composite bows that shoot flawlessly from horseback. They care nothing for the politics of the Piasts or the Rurikids. For them, this war is simply a massive, legalized slave raid. Bringing these men together is only a tenth of the job. The main problem is making sure they don't slaughter each other before they even meet the enemy. This is where Boleslav's genius as a ruthless crisis manager shines. He grips this powder keg in fists of steel. The slightest skirmish between a German and a Pole means the gallows. Stealing provisions from your own side means a severed hand. And provisions are the lifeblood of the campaign. You can't just tell 8,000 soldiers, walk east. An endless supply train trails behind the army. Hundreds of heavy wooden carts hitched to oxen creak along the roads. They carry barrels of salted meat, stacks of dried fish, and sacks of grain. With the army march blacksmiths with their portable anvils, carpenters, and healers. Wagons rattle with spare horseshoes, bundles of arrows, bowstrings made from ox sinew, and spare axles for wheels. When this colossal mechanism is set in motion, the earth literally shakes. The dust kicked up by the march is so thick it can be seen from tens of kilometers away. The stench of horse sweat, unwashed bodies, and tar seeps permanently into clothing. A summer march through the thickets is a living hell of horseflies, blistering heat, and dysentery. But Boleslav drives the army forward. He has turned this war into a business project with strictly defined roles. Germans as the battering ram, Poles holding the front line, Hungarians for mobility, and Pechenegs for terror. In July 1018, this predatory horde reaches the Bug Rivera natural water barrier on the border between Poland and Kievan Rus. The July heat beats down on their helmets. The river water is warm and muddy. Boleslav's army slowly masses on the western bank and halts, because on the eastern bank stands Yaroslav. He has brought the Kievans, the Novgorodians, and his Varangian mercenaries. He managed to block the river fords. Two giant military machines, the best armies of Eastern and Central Europe, have frozen opposite each other. But meeting face to face doesn't mean jumping into battle. In the 11th century, pitched battles aren't won by whoever draws their sword first. They are won by whoever has the strongest nerves. The presence of the river barrier creates a stalemate. Whoever steps into the water first breaks their formation and becomes a perfect target. A heavy pause hangs between the armies, and in that pause, nerves begin to melt. July 1018, the Western Bug. Picture this scene. On the western bank stands Boleslav's colorful horde. Poles, Germans, Hungarians, Pechenegs. On the eastern bank, the Kievan retinue, the Novgorod militia, and Yaroslav's Varangians. Between them lies just a few dozen meters of warm, muddy water. The summer heat is unbearable. War in these conditions is a physical agony even before the battle begins. Metal helmets and chainmail heat up in the sun to the point where they leave burns on the skin. Thousands of horses trample the grass into pure dust. The air is thick with the stench of horse sweat, unwashed human bodies, and damp river mud. Soldiers on both sides go down to the water to let their horses drink. They can see the faces of their enemies, but the order to attack doesn't come. Yaroslav the Wise is playing a defensive game. He's in no rush. Behind him are the wealthy rear supply lines of Rus, and in front of him is the river. His plan is simple and pragmatic. Hold the position. He knows that Boleslav's transnational army consumes a colossal amount of provisions every single day. The moment the Poles and Germans run out of food, they will start robbing each other, and the coalition will self-destruct. Yaroslav just needs to stand and watch. Boleslav understands this perfectly well too. Time is working against him. He needs to bait Yaroslav, force him to make a mistake. But the Kievan prince is too smart to throw himself into the water first. The war of nerves begins. Discipline in a medieval army is a highly fragile thing. When thousands of armed men sit around doing nothing in the sweltering heat for weeks, aggression starts looking for an outlet. And Yaroslav's voivode, a man named Budi, decides to speed up the process. He launches a psychological attack. Every day, Budi rides down to the banks of the Bug and screams insults across the river. He doesn't waste his breath on the rank and file. He aims for the most sensitive spot, the leader dot. By the age of 50, Boleslav the Brave, having spent a lifetime in the saddle and at feasts, had grown very heavy. Chroniclers note that he had become so corpulent it was difficult for him to mount a horse unassisted. Budi weaponizes this physical flaw. He screams across the river, calling the great Polish duke fat-bellied and a pig. Historical sources recorded one specific scene that became the spark for the powder keg: a blazing hot noon. On the Polish side, Boleslav's servants have gone down to the water. They are gutting fish for the duke's lunch, scaling them, and washing the entrails in the river. Budi, standing on the opposite shore, sees this and shouts loudly, ensuring both camps can hear. "Just as you are gutting that fish, we will pierce the fat belly of your prince with our spears." To a modern ear, this is just a dirty piece of trash talk. To an 11th century ruler, it is a political death sentence. Boleslav stands surrounded by Germanic knights and Pecheneg chieftains. This mercenary army follows him only because they believe in his strength and his luck. If he swallows a public humiliation, if he pretends not to have heard it, their respect will evaporate in that very second. Mercenaries don't ride into battle for a man the enemy laughs at. That insult, hurled across the river, dealt more damage to Boleslav than a volley of archers. Yaroslav and his voivode expected Boleslav to lose his temper. They expected him to start scrambling, convening a council of war, rearranging his regiments, and preparing a complex river crossing under fire. They expected the predictable reaction of an insulted monarch. But Boleslav the Brave became the hegemon of Eastern Europe precisely because he knew how to convert his own rage into a cold, tactical instrument. He didn't call a council. He didn't wait for his infantry to line up in neat rows. He simply looked at the water, then at his knights, and made a decision that violated every rule of military logic of the time. July 22nd, 1018. Boleslav delivers no speeches. He convenes no war council. The heavy 50-year-old ruler, whose weight the enemy had just mocked, silently draws his sword, spurs his horse, and charges straight into the river first. No reconnaissance, no formation, wearing heavy chainmail that would inevitably drag him to the bottom if his horse made a single misstep. It was so insanely reckless that it worked perfectly. Seeing their king charging the enemy shore entirely alone, the elite of the army, the Polish pancerni, and the heavy Saxon knights plunge in right after him without a second thought. The river boils. Thousands of war horses tear through the muddy water. No neat lines, no flanking maneuvers. It is just a solid avalanche of iron and flesh, roaring deafeningly as it tears across the ford. Now look at the eastern bank. Yaroslav's army is completely unprepared for combat. A minute ago, the soldiers were laughing at their voivode's jokes and watching the Poles clean fish. Because of the unbearable July heat, many had taken off their chainmail and helmets. Spears were stacked in pyramids. Men are drinking water by the shore. They are absolutely certain that the Bug is an impenetrable shield. That shield is smashed to pieces in minutes. The Polish and German cavalry bursts onto the eastern bank. Water pours from their armor. The horses wheeze heavily, churning the sand beneath their hooves. And they strike. The kinetic energy of thousands of steel-clad riders slamming into a relaxed crowd of infantry, that is the pure physics of annihilation. The Kievans and Novgorodians have no time to form a shield wall. They are simply pulverized. Hooves trample men into the riverbed mud. Those who manage to grab a weapon die in the very first seconds under the sweeping strikes of long Carolingian swords. Yaroslav tries to stop the panic. He throws in his only trump card, the grim Varangian mercenaries. But the heavy Scandinavian infantry cannot fight in such cramped quarters. Their own retreating militia knocks them off their feet. The flanks collapse. Bolesław's Hungarian light cavalry has already crossed slightly upstream and is sweeping into the rear, cutting off any routes of escape. The Pechenegs shower the panicked crowd with clouds of arrows. The battle they had spent months preparing for, the reason the largest armies in Eastern Europe had been assembled, ends before sunset. It's not even a battle. It is a slaughter. The Kievan army ceases to exist as an organized force. Men drop their weapons and flee into the forests. Yaroslav the Wise, a brilliant tactician and the future creator of the Russkaya Pravda legal code, realizes that everything is lost. He turns his horse and runs. And he doesn't run to his capital. Without an army, he cannot hold Kyiv. He rides far to the north, to Novgorod. The chronicles dryly record the detail. The prince managed to escape with only 4 men from his personal retinue. The supply train, the treasury, the tents, everything is left behind on the shore. Boleslav leans heavily on his sword. The wounded scream all around him, while his mercenaries are already ripping silver bracelets off the dead boyars. On this July evening, the Polish military machine reached its absolute apex. The transnational army of the Piasts proved that in an open clash it had no equal. With a single strike, Boleslav had shattered the only force capable of stopping him. But triumph on the battlefield does not mean victory in the war. The road south to the shining golden domes of Kyiv was thrown wide open. The great city was left without defense, and now Boleslav's main problem was not the enemy, but his own army. What would a horde of starving mercenaries and steppe nomads do once they got their hands on the richest metropolis in Eastern Europe? Yaroslav's defeat on the Bug opened a direct route south. The Grand Prince had fled. The professional army had ceased to exist. But Boleslav the Brave did not force his exhausted knights into a forced march. He understood the psychology of war. Before leading his regular forces into the capital of Rus, he let his most savage allies go first. Imagine Kyiv in early August 1018. In the 11th century, this is not just a city. It is a massive, pulsating trade hub of Eastern Europe. The Podil district hums with multilingual chatter. Byzantine amphorae filled with wine, Scandinavian furs, and Arab silver are unloaded at the docks. The city is protected by massive timber and earth ramparts, holding tens of thousands of people inside. And suddenly, this giant mechanism freezes. News of the massacre on the Bug arrives before the enemy does. Yaroslav has abandoned the city, leaving it to its fate. There is no one to defend the walls. The city's elites are paralyzed. A heavy, suffocating August heat hangs in the air, not a breath of wind. In these few days of waiting, Kyiv plunges into a state that is more terrifying than the battle itself. It is the agonizing wait between the absolute realization of catastrophe and the sound of the first battering ram striking the city gates. Dozens of wooden churches are overflowing with people. Inside, there is nothing to breathe. It smells of melting wax, thick incense, and the sweat of thousands of refugees who fled behind the city walls from the surrounding villages. They kneel for hours. But they aren't praying for salvation from the Polish Duke or the heavy German knights. They know that Western armies fight for taxes, castles, and political status. With them, eventually, you can negotiate by buying them off with gold. The citizens are waiting for the ones you cannot negotiate with, the Pechenegs. The 1,000 steppe nomads that Boleslav hired for this campaign rode in the vanguard. To the resident of a settled metropolis, nomads are not just a political opponent. They are a force of nature. Riders who build no houses, drink mare's milk mixed with blood, and do not take prisoners for ransom. They take them to sell. Every craftsman in Podil knows exactly what will happen. If the Pechenegs breach the ramparts first, the city will be erased. The men will be slaughtered that very day, and the women and children will be driven down the black steppe trails to the slave markets of Chersonesus and Byzantium. Dead silence falls over the markets of Kyiv. No one is selling anything. Merchants descend into the damp cellars of their homes and hurriedly, silently, bury their silver dirhams, gold temple rings, and precious silks deep in the dirt. Archaeologists will find many of these hoards only 1,000 years later. Their owners never returned for them. Monks hide church utensils and icon covers in the catacombs. No one is looking west. Everyone is looking south. toward the spot where gray dust begins to rise over the scorched summer steppe. First, far on the horizon, then closer. At night, the sky around Kyiv begins to glow red. The suburbs and outlying villages are burning. The wind carries the smell of smoke. The geopolitical chess match between Boleslav and Yaroslav reveals its true, ugly underside right here on the streets of the abandoned city. Rulers divide crowns, but the people locked inside a wooden trap pay the price. Boleslav intentionally let the people of Kyiv feel this sticky, paralyzing terror right down to the very bottom. The Pechenegs encircled the city, cutting off all escape routes, but they did not initiate a siege. They were waiting for their master. Because when the Polish Duke finally appeared at the gates with his heavy European cavalry, the citizens needed to view the occupier not as an invader. They had to throw the gates open to him as their one and only savior from the savage horde. The Pechenegs never assaulted the walls. Boleslav the Brave kept the steppe horde on a leash, just long enough for the paralyzed, terrified Kievans to accept reality. Their choices narrowed down to two options: either total slaughter and the slave markets of the south, or unconditional surrender to the Western ruler who could hold his attack dogs at bay. On August 14th, 1018, that choice was made. Kyiv opened its gates, an unprecedented event. The ruler of the Polish Principality rides into the capital of Rus, not as a guest and not as a mercenary. He rides in as a master. Riding next to him is Sviatopolk, the formal prince of Kyiv, the man with the legitimate claim to the throne, the entire official pretext for this military campaign. But in this giant procession, no one is looking at Sviatopolk. Every eye is fixed on the heavy, 50-year-old man in thick European armor who confidently leads columns of Saxon knights and Polish retainers behind him. The city stuns the conquerors. For Boleslav's mercenaries, accustomed to the austere timber and earth fortresses of Greater Poland and the stone but cramped German castles, Kyiv is another planet. It is Byzantine luxury transplanted to the banks of the Dnieper. Streets paved with wood, hundreds of churches gleaming in the August sun, colossal warehouses filled with silk and spices, a buzzing multilingual crowd. Kyiv in the 11th century surpassed almost any capital in Europe in sheer size and wealth. And now, all of it lay at the hooves of the Polish cavalry. At the Cathedral of St. Sophia, the highest clergy meets the procession. The Metropolitan comes out to greet Boleslav, carrying crosses and holy relics. The Orthodox Church is forced to welcome a Western Catholic ruler and bless his puppet, Sviatopolk, to save the metropolis from annihilation. It is exactly here, in the moment of this blinding triumph, that the greatest legend of the Polish Middle Ages is born. According to the myth, as Boleslav the Brave rode into the conquered capital, he drew his massive two-handed sword and struck the golden gate of Kyiv with all his might. The sheer force of the blow left a deep notch in the blade. This, the legend says, is how the mythical coronation sword of the Polish kings got its name Szczerbiec, the chipped sword. The weapon that would crown monarchs for centuries to come. Here, the narrator must pause and admit one thing. Historically, this simply could not have happened. The famous stone Golden Gate in Kyiv would be built by the fleeing Yaroslav the Wise almost 20 years after Boleslav's campaign, and the actual Szczerbiec sword, which is housed today in the treasury of Wawel Castle, would not be forged until the early 13th century. But this chronological inconsistency doesn't make the myth empty. On the contrary, this legend was physically necessary for the Poles to cement the true scale of what happened in the summer of 1018 into their national consciousness. Striking the enemy's main gate with a sword is the ultimate symbol of imperial dominance, the gesture of an absolute predator marking his territory in the east. On this day, Boleslav the Brave achieved the absolute maximum a ruler of his era could dream of. He took the richest city on the continent without a fight. But the euphoria of the victors is a fleeting thing. Kyiv surrendered without resistance, counting on mercy. However, 8,000 armed professionals did not march into this city just to admire Byzantine architecture. This army needed to be fed, and the mercenaries had to be paid in silver and gold. And it was the citizens of Kyiv who were about to foot the bill for this great geopolitical triumph. Autumn 1018. Boleslav the Brave is in Kyiv, not as an ally coming to his son-in-law's rescue. He behaves as its rightful owner. The Polish duke's first move is a cold, calculating accountant's decision. Sustaining a massive coalition army inside a large city is far too dangerous and expensive. Boleslav pays out a share of the loot to his most unstable allies, the Pechenegs, and sends them back to the steppe. A portion of the German and Hungarian mercenaries, hauling heavy chests of treasure, also head back west. But the core of the army, the regular Polish regiments, remains. Boleslav makes a simple, brutal decision. He quarters his soldiers inside the homes of the Kyivans. In the 11th century, this means that every single family is forced, at their own expense, to feed, house, and sustain an armed foreigner. A colossal tribute is levied on the city. Silver from merchant stashes, silks, furs, everything is methodically confiscated and flows directly into the Piast war chests. And what about Sviatopolk, the very same lawful prince for whom this war was officially started? He sits in the prince's keep, but he holds no more real power than the servants. It is during these autumn weeks that Sviatopolk begins to realize something terrifying. He is not an ally. He is a smokescreen. Boleslav doesn't even bother consulting him. The Polish ruler directly dispatches embassies from Kyiv to the Byzantine Emperor Basil II and the German Emperor Henry II. He informs them of his success using the tone of an equal player. He treats Rus as if it were his own province. And to firmly cement his status as the absolute dominator, Boleslav commits an act that shocks even his own inner circle. The family of the fleeing Yaroslav was left behind in the captured palace. Among them is his sister, the daughter of the baptizer of Rus, Vladimir the Great, Predslava. Many years ago, long before the Great Wars, Boleslav had asked for her hand in marriage. He sought a dynastic alliance, but the proud Kievan Prince Vladimir refused him. For the ambitious Piast ruler, this was a public humiliation. In the Middle Ages, monarchs forget absolutely nothing. Now Boleslav, as a married man, remember, he had just married the German aristocrat Oda in Bautzen 6 months prior, takes Predslava by force. He makes the princess of the ancient Rurikid dynasty his concubine. Do not look for blind passion or a sudden impulse here. This is a cold, premeditated act of political violence. By taking Predoslava as a concubine, the Western ruler sends an unequivocally clear signal to the rest of the world. The Rurikids are no longer a great dynasty. They are my vassals. I take their gold. I dictate their laws. I sleep in their beds. This is the peak of Boleslav the Brave's hubris. He was no longer just the defender of Polish borders. He had become an imperial predator, intoxicated by his own impunity. But it is exactly here, at the absolute summit of power, that he makes a fatal mistake. By humiliating the Kievan elite and handing the city over to his soldiers to pillage, Boleslav stripped Sviatopolk of the last remnants of his legitimacy in the eyes of the people. The Kievans looked at their prince and saw a weak puppet, incapable of defending even his own sister, let alone the citizenry. The muffled stupor in the streets began to curdle into sheer hatred. At night, in the courtyards of Kiev, they stopped whispering. They started sharpening their knives. Autumn, 1018. The nights are getting colder. Kiev begins to bare its teeth. In the dark alleyways of Podil, Polish patrols vanish without a trace. Skirmishes erupt in the markets. At first glance, it looks like a spontaneous urban guerrilla war, pointless and uncontrollable. But in reality, this chaos has a specific director, and that director is sitting in the prince's keep. Sviatopolk the Accursed, whom Boleslav considered a spineless puppet, decides to play his own game. He sees perfectly well that his father-in-law has no intention of handing him real power, and that the Polish army is simply robbing his subjects blind. And Sviatopolk, who doesn't have a single loyal regiment left to his name, decides to outplay Boleslav using someone else's hands. He pits the occupiers against his own people. The chronicles record the secret, terrifying order he passes down to the Kievans. However many Lyakhs are in the city, kill them. And the city obeys. A ruthless, hidden massacre begins. Knives are sharpened in every courtyard. Poles are slaughtered in their sleep at inns, isolated and killed in back alleys, poisoned in taverns. In a few weeks, Boleslav loses more men than he did crossing the Bug River. But if you think about it, Sviatopolk committed the classic mistake of a weak player. He spectacularly, catastrophically overplayed his hand. He thought he could punish Boleslav, scare him, force him to show respect. Sviatopolk naively believed that Boleslav would fear the wrath of the Kievans, rein in his soldiers, yet still leave a portion of the army behind for protection. They were family now, after all. Sviatopolk wanted to get rid of the ravenous occupiers, but keep the Polish Iron Shield. He simply didn't calculate who he was playing against. He thought he was playing his father-in-law. He was playing a predator. Boleslav saw through the scheme instantly, and his response was a masterpiece of pragmatic cynicism. He didn't launch punitive raids or burn Kiev to the ground. He knew that wintering in a hostile metropolis, where both the streets and the prince himself were actively fighting you, was military suicide. With the first snowfall, the roads would turn to mud, and the army would be entirely cut off from its supply bases. And up north, Yaroslav was already hiring fresh Varangian warbands. Boleslav simply issues the order to pack up. The project is closed. The profits are secured. The Poles march out of Kyiv, and this departure becomes Sviatopolk's personal hell. Boleslav leaves his son-in-law on the throne, but he takes absolutely everything out of the city. Heavy oak wagons are loaded down with the gold and silver of the Kievan treasury. To guarantee safe passage home, Boleslav takes hundreds of hostages from the highest echelons of the boyar nobility. Along with them, he drags Predslava Yaroslav's sister back west. Sviatopolk, panicking, begs him to leave at least one Polish regiment, at least 100 riders to guard the keep. But Boleslav just stares at him coldly. Not a single spearman, not a single shield. You wanted freedom from the Poles? You got it. Start swimming. The father-in-law abandons the son-in-law in an empty, ravaged city. Completely devoid of money, devoid of an army, surrounded by boyars who know exactly who orchestrated the autumn massacre. The Polish army, weighed down by colossal loot, slowly marches westward. And here, on the way home, Boleslav makes his final move. He doesn't just return to the old borders, he takes the Chervan cities. This is a vast, wealthy territory at the crossroads of modern Poland and Ukraine. 37 years ago, the Kievan prince Vladimir forcefully stripped it from the Poles. Now, Boleslav takes the land back. He doesn't ask Sviatopolk for it as a gesture of gratitude. He acts by the right of the strong. He simply stations his garrisons there and declares the region Polish. Annexing the Chervan cities isn't just a boost to his reputation. It means controlling the overland trade routes between Europe and Asia. Now the customs duties will pour directly into Gniezno. By the end of the year, Boleslav the Brave returns home. He is welcomed not merely as a ruler, he is welcomed as a living god of war. He forced the Holy Roman Empire to retreat. He plundered the mother of Russian cities. His wagons are bursting with enough silver to pay mercenaries for years to come. And somewhere far behind, in an empty Kievan palace, the doomed Sviatopolk is counting his days. Very soon, Yaroslav will return with a new army. Sviatopolk will lose again. He will flee, and he will die an inglorious death in the steppes. But the Polish duke couldn't care less. Boleslav got everything. The borders are secure. The treasury is full. The enemies are crushed. But within this absolute triumph lay a trap. What is a ruler supposed to do when he has forged his country into the perfect military mechanism and there is no one left to conquer? And most importantly, what happens to this giant empire when the monarch's own health, ruined by decades of sleeping in the saddle, begins to rapidly fail? The year 1024 arrives. Boleslav the Brave is approaching 60. For the 11th century, this is extreme old age. Decades spent in the saddle, sleeping in freezing tents, shivering through the torrential rains of military campaigns, it all takes its toll. The ruler, whose very name made garrisons tremble from the Elbe to the Dnieper, is suffering from a severe illness. It is becoming harder and harder for him to move. He knows time is almost up. The moment he closes his eyes, his neighbors will pounce on his state to claw back their lost lands. The status of a victor is not inherited. The only thing that can legally protect the Piast dynasty is a royal title. In the Middle Ages, a crown is not just a piece of jewelry. It fundamentally changes the status of the state itself. A principality can be carved up, subjugated, or made into a vassal state. A kingdom, according to the laws of the time, is recognized as sovereign and indivisible. The problem is that the right to hand out crowns belongs to exactly two people on the planet, the Pope and the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and neither of them wants to see a Slavic king on their eastern borders. Boleslav waits for the perfect moment, and that moment arrives. In July 1024, his longtime mortal enemy dies, Emperor Henry II. The inevitable succession crisis erupts in Germany, and the German elites are entirely too distracted to care about their eastern fringes. Almost simultaneously, power changes hands on the papal throne in Rome. The two main pillars of the European order are momentarily paralyzed. Boleslav strikes this blind spot with the same ruthless speed he once used to hurl his cavalry into the waters of the Bug River. In the spring of 1025, on Easter Sunday, in the Cathedral of Gniezno, Boleslav places the royal crown upon his own head. He does it himself, without the empire's permission, relying solely on the backing of his own Polish clergy. It is an act of colossal political audacity. A self-proclaimed king is throwing down the gauntlet to the entire established hierarchy of the Christian world. When the German chroniclers hear of this, they spit venom, calling the act the pride of a barbarian and an illegal usurpation. But they can do absolutely nothing. It is a fait accompli. Poland officially becomes a kingdom. Boleslav paid for this status with everything he had. He bled the country's economy dry. He turned the peasantry into a support staff for the military. And now, the heavy golden crown finally rests on his graying head. He wore it for exactly 2 months. On June 17th, 1025, the first king of Poland dies. Here we arrive at the central paradox of this story. If we look at the map on the day of Bolesław's death, we see the great Piast Empire at the absolute zenith of its glory. From the Baltic Sea to the Carpathians, from the Lusatian marches in the west to the Chervan cities in the east. But if we look closer, we see scorched earth. Boleslav departed undefeated, but he left a geopolitical catastrophe in his wake. He taught his giant army to live off plunder, and now there was nothing left to feed them. And waiting right outside the borders were the neighbors he had spent decades humiliating. To the west, the empire, thirsting to wash away the stain of the Peace of Bautzen. To the south, Bohemia, which had never forgiven the Piasts for their occupation. To the east, Yaroslav the Wise, amassing fresh forces to reclaim his stolen lands and exact vengeance for the sacking of Kyiv. The ring of hatred had closed tight, and the entire crushing weight of this red-hot mechanism crashed down in a single day onto the shoulders of the man standing by Bolesław's coffin, his son and heir, Mieszko II. Boleslav the Brave went out a winner. That is perhaps the only thing in this entire story you can believe without a single caveat. He fulfilled the promise we discussed at the very beginning, a man who inherited a peripheral Slavic principality, forced the Holy Roman Empire to sign a peace treaty on his terms. He ripped open the gates of the wealthiest city in Eastern Europe. He placed the royal crown on his own head, without asking permission from either the Pope or the Emperor. If you measure success using medieval geopolitical coordinates, this is the absolute maximum. There is simply nowhere higher to climb. But therein lies the final paradox of the first Polish king. His greatest triumph became the bomb planted squarely under the foundation of his own state. And Boleslav lit the fuse to that bomb himself, with his own two hands. We are used to thinking that empires collapse due to sweeping global reasons, due to economic exhaustion, or the relentless assault of external enemies. All of that was certainly true. Poland had been squeezed dry, transformed into a permanent military camp, and the neighbors beyond the borders were just waiting for the perfect moment to snatch back their stolen lands. But Boleslav made a far more fatal internal political mistake, a mistake inside his own family. The king had an eldest son, Bezprim. By law and by right of primogeniture, he was the one who should have inherited the Piast's throne of steel. But Boleslav decided otherwise. Blinded by greatness, or perhaps by some internal calculations of his own, he disinherits his eldest son and hands the crown to the younger one, Mieszko II. Wronged, stripped of absolutely everything, Bezprim did not sit quietly waiting for his fate in a monastery. He flees. And he doesn't just flee anywhere, he runs straight east, right to Yaroslav the Wise, the very man whose capital Boleslav had just plundered and whose Chervan cities he had stolen. If you think about it, we are witnessing a stunning, almost mocking historical irony. In the summer of 1018, Boleslav the Brave invades Kievan Rus to overthrow Yaroslav and plant his own puppet, Sviatopolk, on the throne. Just a few years after Boleslav's death, history will flip completely upside down, mirroring the past with absolute precision. Now it will be Yaroslav the Wise who, having allied himself with the new German Emperor Conrad II, will invade Poland. Why? To overthrow Boleslav's lawful heir and place the wronged, vengeance-hungry Bezprim on the throne. The Piast military machine will prove utterly powerless against this intrafamilial hatred. The predator's triumph turned into the perfect trap for his children. By subjugating his neighbors, Boleslav expanded the perimeter of his enemies, and by stripping his own son of his birthright, he handed those exact enemies the perfect weapon to destroy his dynasty. The greatness of one generation was, once again, bought on credit. And it will be Mieszko II who has to pay off that debt with his own blood. Picture the summer of 1025, the cathedral in Gniezno. In the dim light, surrounded by the smell of heavy wax and cold stone, lies the dead king. Resting on his graying head is the very crown for which he redrew the map of Europe, a heavy, cold hoop of gold. His sons stand by the coffin. The new king, Mieszko II, looks down at his father, feeling the crushing, unliftable weight of the empire he has just inherited. And somewhere far away, on the eastern border, his older brother Bezprim is already rallying his regiments. Riding beside him are Yaroslav's Varangians and the heavy knights of the empire. They are riding to take what is theirs, and there will be no one left to stop them. In the next fourth episode of our series, we will witness the perfect storm. We will break down how Mieszko II collided with the synchronized vengeance of the entire world, how everything forged over decades collapsed in just a few short years, and how yesterday's mighty empire was reduced to ashes. But that will be the story of a different ruler. For now, the heavy gold crown simply glimmers in the darkness of the cathedral, paid for with blood that is yet to be spilled.